You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, all eyes have been on Jack Smith lately. We have an update as far as Jack Smith is concerned. What just happened?
So, Brian, the reporting is that Jack Smith is winding down. That's the quote we keep hearing. His criminal investigations and prosecutions of Donald Trump. Perhaps not surprising, because Donald Trump said the minute he gets sworn into office, he will fire Jack Smith in, quote, 2 seconds, close quote. So it only makes sense for Jack Smith to get ahead of, his upcoming termination by Donald Trump. So what we also have heard rumblings of is that Jack Smith is working diligently on a special counsel report, right? Just as Bob Mueller issued the Trump-Russia report, which was deeply damaging of Donald Trump and others, particularly, members of his campaign who were in constant communication with Russia, and Russia was trying to help Donald Trump win the election previously. Jack Smith is in the process, we are told, of putting together a report about his entire investigation, not just what we have seen in the court filings, because, Brian, the one thing I can promise our viewers is what we have seen in the public court filings is a very small fraction of the evidence that Jack Smith has regarding Donald Trump's crimes, both his crimes down in Florida, which, our viewers will recall. Donald Trump was indicted for unlawfully retaining classified documents and information, our national security secrets, obstructing justice by refusing to return them when the grand jury subpoenaed them. And a grand jury subpoena has the force of a court order directing those documents to be returned. Donald Trump criminally defied that subpoena. And, of course, violating our nation's espionage laws because of the sensitivity of this national defense information. Being prosecuted down there, that case is up on appeal right now. And, of course, he's being prosecuted for all crimes surrounding his efforts to steal the 2020 presidential election, which culminated in him launching an attack on the U.S. Capitol to try to stop the certification of Joe Biden's election win. We are going to see, I am quite confident, a several hundred page, could be 500, 700, 900 pages, we'll see, report from special counsel Jack Smith documenting all of the evidence of crime by Donald Trump and probably his many criminal associates, some who are still unindicted co-conspirators in Donald Trump's federal prosecution in Washington, D.C. That will be an eye-opening moment. It will probably be a jaw-dropping moment, and it will be a really disheartening moment. Why? Because it looks like those crimes might forever go unprosecuted. That is not a sure thing, but that's certainly where, unfortunately, the smart money is riding.
Glenn, I would presume that Jack Smith has a vested interest in making sure that that report is released in this administration, because we already saw what happened with the Mueller report when Bill Barr got a hold of it and he issued his summary of it, which on its face was the complete antithesis of what the actual Mueller report said. So doesn't he have a vested interest in making sure that we see this thing now before it's distorted and manipulated by the Trump administration?
Absolutely. If the report is not issued now, I have to believe the Trump administration will bury all of that evidence, will probably try to destroy all of that evidence. And the good news is Attorney General Merrick Garland has gone on record a number of times as saying he would release any special counsel report that was issued. So, yeah, I think we're going to see it. And, I think it will be a melancholy moment because, it will bring into full focus all of the crimes that were committed against we the people in violation of our voting rights. And yet, I have little hope that, accountability will ever come, at least, in as much as there may never be a criminal trial, conviction, and sentence of Donald Trump for those crimes.
What about for Jack Smith specifically here? Does he have any legal exposure in this subsequent administration that's pretty much promised retribution against his political enemies?
No legitimate legal exposure.
Okay, so I have to ask then, what about illegitimate legal exposure?
Oh, all day long. Listen, any enemy of Donald Trump is probably somebody who needs to be concerned, needs to protect themselves, because Donald Trump has vowed that this is about vengeance and revenge. I will be your retribution. That was one of the planks of Donald Trump's, campaign. I will get revenge on my political enemies. And he promised to use the military, the U.S. military, to go after the, quote, enemy from within, which he defined as his political opponents and enemies. Jack Smith has to be one of those marquee enemies, at least in Donald Trump's estimation. The good news is he was acting lawfully. He was lawfully appointed by Attorney General Merrick Garland to be special counsel and to conduct these investigations and prosecutions. And then, Brian, he was in court. He and his team were in court damn near every day, getting what? Judicial authorization to do everything he sought to do. If the rule of law is being applied as it is intended to be applied, Jack Smith is bulletproof. He will have no legal exposure. But if we think back to the original Trump show, his first administration, not to be confused with the upcoming sequel, what was one of the things Donald Trump did? Well, he had his corrupt Attorney General, Bill Barr, order that the people who investigated Donald Trump for suspected crimes be investigated themselves. And, he even tried to push some baseless prosecutions on guys like, former Deputy Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, which ultimately went nowhere because, people were still being loyal to the rule of law. So he was never indicted because there was no evidence that he'd actually committed crimes. So Jack Smith better get ready. Other marquee enemies in Donald Trump's mind better get ready because, Donald Trump will probably act not lawfully to go after them, but perhaps by abusing the powers of government.
Well, Glenn, won't that really have the consequence of him expending all of his political capital and time and energy and resources on just pursuing kind of what may very well be a dead end at the end of the day?
Yes, and it will weaken him, not strengthen him. Here's one thing I'll promise our viewers, Brian. The federal judiciary, particularly the federal trial court judges, will stand as a bulwark against anything Donald Trump tries to do that is unlawful, that is an abuse of power or an abuse of position. They are not going to let him get away with vindictive prosecutions. In fact, when I hear, these Trump loyalists stand up and say things like, and I'm not going to quote it verbatim because it's a little too obscene and demeaning, saying, we're going to put Tish James in jail. I can promise you that. These folks are their own worst enemies and they're nothing but miscalculation because just by saying that would actually give Tish James a robust vindictive prosecution defense if they tried to prosecute Tish James. And I actually don't think they will try. They'll probably try to lash out at and attack her in any other number of ways. But listen, even the federal judges who were appointed by Donald Trump, day in and day out, have been ruling in a way that I'm sure displeases Donald Trump, for example, in the January 6th insurrection prosecution. So I believe that the federal judiciary, I'm going to set aside the Supreme Court for the moment, the federal trial court judges, even the many Trump appointees, are going to act as a bulwark against the Trump administration's illegality, abuse, and overreach.
Let's finish off with this. Glenn, Jack Smith came from The Hague. That's where he was investigating war crimes across the world. Is there any possibility that if the U.S. fails to properly prosecute Donald Trump here, which clearly that looks like is going to happen, that Jack Smith could continue his work under a different jurisdiction where he doesn't have to rely on Donald Trump's own DOJ blocking an investigation into him?
Yeah, before I answer that directly, let's look at the sort of backdrop here of the International Criminal Court, The Hague, right? It's a body that came into existence in 2002 to try to go after war criminals. Their jurisdiction, this is what the ICC, the International Criminal Court, investigates: genocide, crimes against humanity, which they define as murder, rape, torture, enslavement, and deportation. We'll put a pin in that for a moment. War crimes and crimes of aggression. So all of the countries that have become members of what's called the Rome Statute, that's the treaty that created the ICC, and countries have to voluntarily join to become members and to have their countries subjected to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Those countries are in play because if they commit those designated crimes, then they could be investigated and prosecuted by the ICC. But has the United States chosen to join the ICC and the Rome Statute? What do you think, Brian?
Probably not.
That would be no, because even though we're beacons of democracy and good government, and we like to think that we protect against things like genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression, we have steadfastly refused to join the ICC. So if a dictator came to power in the United States and engaged in those crimes that I just detailed, the ICC would not have jurisdiction to investigate it. So now to directly answer your question, Jack Smith, who, let me say, Brian, I always had such respect for. Why? Because after he had a really impactful run, not a full career, but a really impactful run at the Department of Justice, including being the head of what's called the PIN, the Public Integrity Section, going after corrupt politicians. He didn't leave the Department of Justice to go to a private firm and line his pockets. He left to get after war criminals. He voluntarily went over and worked as a prosecutor at the ICC. He may very well go back there, but if he does, unless somehow we decide to join the ICC and subject the United States of America to its jurisdiction, Jack Smith will not be able to get after anybody who might aspire to be a dictator in the US of A.
Something tells me that Donald Trump probably isn't falling over himself to join the ICC anytime in the next 4 years. Just a hunch I have here. Now, with all of that said, we will, of course, stay on top of whatever Jack Smith decides to do here. We'll keep an eye out for that report, and we'll also keep an eye out for whatever Jack Smith decides to do with these ongoing cases that he's prosecuting against Trump, both in Washington, D.C. regarding January 6th and blocking the certification of the election, and down in Florida regarding classified documents being stolen by Donald Trump. So if he opts to dismiss these cases, then that would be the end of them. If he doesn't dismiss these cases and allows the Trump administration to corruptly dismiss them, that would of course preserve the right for a future DOJ to resurrect those cases at some point in the future. So we'll keep an eye on all of that. For those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe.
Jack Smith is reportedly winding down his criminal investigations into Donald Trump. The timing aligns with Trump's threats to fire Smith immediately upon returning to office. Special Counsel report in development. Smith is preparing a comprehensive report detailing the evidence of Trump's alleged crimes, including classified document retention, obstruction of justice, and efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The report is expected to be several hundred pages and will document more than what has been publicly disclosed. Concerns over future accountability. There are doubts about whether the crimes outlined in Smith's report will lead to prosecutions under a future Trump administration, which may attempt to bury or destroy evidence. Attorney General's role in report release. Attorney General Merrick Garland has committed to releasing any special counsel report, likely ensuring the public sees it before potential interference. Risks to Jack Smith under a Trump administration. Smith faces no legitimate legal exposure but could face politically motivated retribution under Trump, who has vowed revenge on his perceived enemies. Historical examples show Trump attempting to target investigators during his first term. Federal judiciary as a check on abuse. Federal judges, including many Trump appointees, have acted as a check against unlawful actions. They are expected to resist vindictive or baseless prosecutions. Jack Smith's background and potential future role. Smith previously worked at the International Criminal Court, ICC, prosecuting war crimes. While he could return to the ICC, the U.S. is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, limiting the ICC's jurisdiction over U.S. actions. Uncertainty surrounding Trump cases. If Smith dismisses cases before leaving, it ends them. If not, future administrations could revisit them if Trump attempts to dismiss them corruptly. Ongoing monitoring of developments. The situation remains fluid, with ongoing prosecutions related to classified documents and the January 6 insurrection. The public is encouraged to stay informed,